Hello, hello, this is Alex Birkett, and you're listening to the Long Game Podcast. In this episode, I'm talking with Bridget Poetker. Bridget is currently the Director of Growth at Loop and Tie, previously brand and content at Postal and content at G2. She co-hosted a podcast with Sarah Payan called Self-Control and Cheese to help 20-somethings in B2B tech navigate their personal and professional lives. In this conversation, we cover a series of her hot takes, including not always needing to have a hot take and opinion, as well as sussing out a company's culture, tips on doing so, acting more senior than you are, and the idea that we don't actually work 8 hours a day. We also cover the differences in organic growth programs at startups versus hyperscale companies like G2. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Bridget Poetker. So on the topic of Chicago, you mentioned on your personal website that Velvet Taco has the best tacos in Chicago. And I was just curious if you've updated your beliefs on this or if you still believe this to be true.
No, very much have updated my beliefs and very much have not updated my portfolio site in a long time, I guess.
I kind of figured. I was hoping that to be true.
Yeah, I mean, it's good, right? For your like fusion, whatever last minute situation if you're out and about. But the best tacos are in Pilsen.
Pilsen?
Mm-hmm, that whole neighborhood, like anywhere that you go there is great.
Interesting.
I also love La Josie in West Loop. Anything in West Loop I will eat. But La Josie is great if you want a $12 steak taco.
Yeah. I'm not a Velvet Taco hater. We have one here in Austin and I enjoy it for what it is. But having lived in Texas for a long time now, I feel like it's hard to describe that in the same genre as like an authentic Mexican
it's not authentic
taco or something.
No, it's a buffalo chicken, like buffalo chicken taco. That's the vibe that you're going for. But I should update my portfolio for sure.
Most likely. That's a very important fact. I am happy to hear that Chicago has good tacos, though, because that's one thing. Like now that I'm traveling, now that I've lived in Austin for a while, even somewhere like New York, it's for me a little difficult to find good Mexican food, at least in comparison to what you get in like San Antonio or Austin.
Yeah, Chicago is not close to that still. I think you're very spoiled in Austin. You can eat tacos for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and never be upset. So.
The breakfast taco is incredibly underrated, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, for sure. I went to San Antonio. I've been there once. And we did the like Riverwalk situation through the mall and all that stuff. But I think I ate breakfast tacos every day. I was there for 4 days and I was like, can we get more breakfast tacos?
Those are like my two food opinions, regional food opinions. The breakfast taco should be more common, and cheese curds. I don't understand why cheese curds are not more ubiquitous in the United States.
Yeah.
It's like only a Midwest thing, really.
I'm very glad to be as close to Wisconsin as I am. So for the cheese curds specifically.
All right. So with that out of the way, the important stuff out of the way, one of the things that you had mentioned on the intake form before we were talking was startups. So small startups versus big startups. And I assume right now you would consider yourself at a small startup in comparison to G2, or what did you have? Like, what is the context of what you had meant by that?
Yeah. I think most startups by nature are small compared to some larger corporate companies, right? But I would consider like G2, Active Campaign, anybody pushing like 300, 400, like it's not really a small startup anymore. Like you still get this startup vernacular or whatever you want to call it, but it functions completely different than a 40-person startup. I don't think that people talk about that enough or segment them in a way, because like obviously your business goals, your needs, it's going to be different. Your teams look different. And there's people that thrive in one environment to the other. I think that's a huge driver of why people kind of like job hop and move around so much, is because they find their niche of like, I like to build the stuff, so I need to be at the small startups, or I like to be one person on a 40-person marketing team. So I think in a way, like really distilling it down like that puts it more on the employee to be like, what do I enjoy? What are my strengths? Kind of, instead of like just having to follow the company along. I don't know that there's a lot of people that stay at a startup for more than 3 years, 4 years. I think once you pass that mark or 2 years, then you're going to just be there until they exit, hopefully.
Yeah. I wonder if like that word startup used to mean something more specific than it does now. Like many words that we use, I feel like growth is one of those things where I don't know who invented it. Maybe it was Chamath at Facebook or Sean Ellis with Growth Hacker. I feel like it used to mean something very concrete. And now it's like you use it almost as like a marker for anything that you want to like beef up your job description. You make it a growth marketer, a growth content strategist, a growth paid marketer. And now it's just sort of this catch-all thing. Because when I started college or my first company out of college was pre-seed, just the founders, super tiny startup. CXL was tiny. And then I joined HubSpot. And HubSpot was like 1,000 employees. And I feel like they still called themselves a startup. Like they were a public company. And I was like, these are not the same. This isn't the same thing.
Startup's a mindset, I guess, is what we're getting at.
Startup is in the ping pong tables that you allow employees to use at the office.
Yeah, exactly.
So where do you see yourself fitting in? Like, have you developed a preference towards one size versus the other?
Yeah, I think there are benefits to all of the above. I started my career at a really small ad agency, like a boutique agency. I was there for 3 years. I learned a lot. And from there, I went freelance for 6 months because I didn't need insurance. And I was selling my mom's insurance. I was like, well, I should try this. And then G2 happened. So I was at G2 for 1.5 years, and that was like in their scale up period. They have had many scale up periods since then. But that was, I think they had just raised Series C, and their content team went from 4 to 30. So within 2 months, we hired 20 people on that one team, which was crazy. Again, I learned so much. I learned what to do, what not to do, but how to like test things, fail at some stuff, try different things. But yeah, I really enjoyed the ability to be on a big team like that. The whole marketing team was 50 people, which is a lot for a company that's 300 people still. The sales force was probably the only team that was bigger than us at G2, between the AEs, the SDRs, and I think relationship managers and account managers was technically sales too. But I learned that like I maybe am not somebody that likes to do like only 3 things and only impact, my monthly goals were based on how many articles I could write. And then when I was leading the SEO content part, it was more of just like how much output can you have, which is fine. But I wanted to have the larger like content to revenue conversation. And G2's model is a little different. Like we were just in charge of getting as much traffic as we could to the site. It's obviously like their product marketing is like how many buyers they have on their visiting their site. So that was our directive, at least for the 1.5 years that I was there. But then I went to a company called Big Time that was billing software. Smaller team, maybe 5 on the marketing team. And I just got to do a lot more. I started there in like a paid kind of like digital marketing role. Immediately found out that probably was not for me. Moved my way into a brand role. And then that's when I started at Postal, leading their brand and content, which was great to have both of those things under one team. But that's probably the smallest startup I've ever been a part of outside of Loop and Tie, which is where I'm at now. But I got that like, I like own all of these things, which can be super overwhelming, but I love having impact across the board.
Yeah, I want to touch on brand and content. And I also want to go back to G2 if you're willing to. I know it's been a couple of years, but the thing on owning or having exposure to a lot of things is an interesting theme for me, because for a couple of years, I saw a lot of tweets and like conversation around like, oh, like you hired a growth marketer and expect them to do, and then they list off all these tasks. And I get that like some companies have poor expectations around like what a role can accomplish. But when I saw those, I was like, man, like I would love a role like that. That sounds awesome. Like I wouldn't want to like have like, complete execution and like the expectations really matter there. But I feel like it's different strokes for different folks. And like the opposite of that, where it's like, hey, you're a copywriter. You're going to write copy on this landing page forever. Like that sounds much more like a nightmare to me personally than to have that wider scope of different kind of like touch points you can have.
Yeah, I think that that's exactly right. That like there's perfect jobs for different people, right? Like, I think you're right that most people shit on those ones that have 30 bullet points. They're hiring for 4 jobs. But if it's a Series A or pre-seed company, they can only afford to hire one marketer. And I think that it comes down, like, if they're hiring the first marketer or like a generalist of any kind, chances are the people that are hiring for that role don't even know what they need that role to necessarily do. I see those 30 bullet points as a way to be like, I'm going to get to come in and figure out what's going to work and what to prioritize. And again, like I need the variety of stuff. And I think it kind of speaks to like the brand and content at Postal was, I want our content to do all of the things. I don't want to just put out content. This piece is for SEO. This piece is for that. Like, how do we do all of those things within one piece of content or one campaign? That I just feel like you have a better mix of strategy in all those things if one person is in charge of content, one person's in charge of brand, one person's like, you don't get collaboration that way, especially remote as we are.
Can you touch on the brand versus content thing there? I know what content is. Can you explain to me a performance marketing, growth focused, quantitative growth hacker? What is brand? And how does that tie in with content?
Yeah, I think that brand honestly is in everything that you do in marketing. I think that there's brand in product marketing. I think there's brand pieces in demand gen. I think there's brand in that content. So those are the 3 buckets that like we in SaaS think about really. Brand is like circle all of those things, or if like it's a Venn diagram, brand sits in the middle. But I think that it's how you show up in the social feeds or on that demand gen, like how is that person carrying themselves or like coming to the conversation? Is it really casual? Is it more buttoned up? Like all of those little things matter. Brand is everybody in your company too. So it's like trying to get every single person involved with like the voice that you're trying to have as a company. It's a feeling. It's really hard. That's why a lot of people don't do it. Or they give it to the marketing team and they're like, make t-shirts. Like that's not a brand, right? Like brand is not t-shirts. Brand's not even like LinkedIn headers. But I think that that's why it was so important to me when I started at Postal. It was originally a director of content role. And I asked them, I'm like, can we put brand in there too? Because I think these should live next to each other.
Right. How much of that, I'm curious, is top down, like centralized planning? Like how much of that do you as a company or in your position, how much did you say, like, here's what our brand is going to be and here's how we're going to kind of distribute that message? I don't know if you got like that specific around like channels and how you actually like showcase that versus how much of it is something a little bit outside of your control, like almost an emergent property that like your customers and audience almost define with you.
Yep. I think it's a balance of both. I think it's like leading a horse to water. It's like, what flavor do we want the water to be? And what flavor of this will like these horses like, right? And then it's like, how many horses come? Okay, should we change the flavor to this? Is it better? Is it worse? Like, I think there's always that like audience testing. And I think you're right. Like at some point, your customers are going to end up telling you what they want from your brand. So it's important to have that customer feedback too. But from the directive side, at Postal, it was me and there was a director of demand gen. And we worked really closely together to make sure all of our ads had we talked a lot about even brand campaigns from like a paid ad perspective should match what we're doing in organic, and like thinking about paid ads more like traditional companies think about their advertising versus like getting these conversions. What creative campaigns can we come up with? Again, that's my just advertising background and being like, how do we do things differently so that people actually pay attention to us?
Is there a preceding step? Like, so I'm used to like SEO, organic, and like you could think of the traditional playbook as, looking for content gaps and keywords and filling in a content roadmap and trying to rank for those terms, convert on those terms, et cetera. Where does the brand mise en place fit into that? Is that something that you're coming up with a message that's kind of like interwoven through that content? Or how do you think content marketers can invoke more of that brand through the efforts that they're currently engaged in?
Yeah, it's interesting. So at Loop and Tie, I started here in January. And I guess rebrands are just something that follow me around. I don't know if you can hear my dog. She's like wanting to join our conversation.
She can join.
But Big Time did a rebrand, Postal did a rebrand. We're doing a rebrand at Loop and Tie, a refresh, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, I'm building the SEO strategy at the same time. So a lot of that looks like that traditional playbook that you just talked about, finding those gaps. Okay, we're only ranking for branded terms. That's normal of a startup for this size, but like, how do we go and get some of the category terms? How do we get some listicles out? How do we get backlinks? Like all of those things. Like, how do we create content that is going to drive growth? But then also, to your point, having those workshops with our agency that we're using, Innovate Map, to talk about like higher level messaging. When we write a best of gifts post under $50, what does that sound like from us? I think that SEO content kind of gets a bad rap in that it's just for Google, but at some point somebody has to read that. Like, if you want it to stay there, if you want it to get backlinks, if you want people to actually, and for me, like now that I have a product where there's a freemium model, like I can drive signups, I can drive conversions, like somebody's going to read that. So it's not just your traditional SEO listicle post. It's like, how do we have a voice inside of there that sounds like maybe a little bit more e-commerce, maybe a little bit more retail, so that people start to trust us and like our, advice about gifting.
Yeah. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people use SEO content as like this epithet. It's like it to them naturally means that the content is bad, but it's like nobody ever said that it had to be bad. Like, right. You can still make it good content. It's just like,
you should.
It's where people find it. It has nothing to do with the quality of the piece.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that that's something. Loop and Tie is the first place that I've been at that has any kind of freemium model. So I'm learning. Obviously, G2 had like the whole thing is kind of a freemium, I suppose. But that's a totally different type of marketplace. It's interesting to think more like strategically around like that type of SEO content or like search in general. Okay, if we're selling gifting and like it's not necessarily that they're going to buy a huge contract through us for the platform, maybe LinkedIn ads or the traditional demand gen kind of things won't work in terms of awareness, because I'm working off of a calendar that like, I don't know when your employee's birthday is. How do I know that my ad is going to hit you at the time that you need to give a gift? But you are going to search. Maybe you saw the ad on LinkedIn or whatever. But when you need something, and that's where like that brand and content kind of go together for me, at least at this company, is like that brand, like recognition, awareness kind of leads to like this. Okay, then they're going to go and search. Oh yeah, I remember that company that I saw that one time, whatever. But you're right. I think a lot of marketing gets a bad rap in terms of that. There's like a lot of boxes, and I'm here to say like, there's no boxes. Like, I'm a content marketer / copywriter, and I'm a head of growth somewhere, which it's just interesting.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask about that. You'd gone from a content background, director of content, to a director of growth. So what did you have to pick up new skills? Did you have to make any mindset shifts, or how has that transformation been?
Yeah, I think traditionally growth is seen as like the pay to play stuff, right? Just be everywhere that you possibly can be to acquire as many people as possible. At Loop, we definitely think more in the organic space. Like that's where everybody in marketing is trying to build right now. Unfortunately, I think it's seen as like a free channel. Nothing is ever free. Like whether you're paying freelancers for stuff or me or whoever, like somebody's doing that work, like you're not throwing extra dollars. I understand that, but you build a moat that way. Like there's a lot of the gifting companies that have built a lot of content. But again, I think that we have a unique place inside of organic search because we have that freemium model. There's a lot of people that I'm more focused now on capturing demand than I ever have been, I guess is the short answer to that question. I even kind of was asking my boss, MK, like I've known them for 4-ish years now. And somebody I've always wanted to work with. And they were like, would you come be my head of growth? And I'm like, are you sure? Because I'm not a growth marketer. Like, I guess I am now, but I had to kind of pick up that like paid stuff, which it's not that I can't do it. It just like doesn't bring me joy to like move around numbers and Google ads and stuff like that. But the creative side of that, creating the ad campaigns, creating that stuff does. So it's definitely a little bit more execution than I'm used to. I'm used to more strategy, but I'm enjoying it so far. It's a nice balance of both. It feels like two separate sides of your brain, but really having it all together is better for the marketing strategy anyway.
It sounds like there's also a conversion piece that's been added in with especially the freemium model. Whereas I don't know if like in the past, like the end goal would have been something as simple as traffic or maybe MQLs. Whereas now, like it sounds like your marketing efforts and like the planning is going towards like this endpoint of what does somebody want to accomplish and like how can they get into our product to do that?
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's where MK saw the need, deep understanding for just how search intent works, which is something that organic content marketers understand. I was fortunate at G2 to be able to do as much research as we did for as many things as we wrote. Like I learned how to read a keyword and know that person's looking for this, that person's looking for that. A lot of people don't think that way. So getting specific about, the software keywords like corporate gifting platform, corporate gifting solution, anything that's like a software, maybe we make a conversion landing page that's a really high intent search versus somebody looking for those 50 best gift ideas for our end of holiday, blah, blah, blah. Like that's probably a blog post because they want a huge list. Like a conversion landing page wouldn't work for that. So trying to find those different workflows and what's going to work is what I'm building currently. We haven't put anything out there yet, but we're getting there.
Okay. Talk to me about the G2 world for a little bit. I want to hear, because it's such a crazy scale. You mentioned it briefly, the employee count that was added when you were there. And I feel like I know a lot of your G2 comrades.
We were everywhere.
Yeah, totally. Like Jordan, we had Jacob on the podcast. I've talked to Kevin a couple times. So I feel like I know a lot of the team, and you guys have like this little mafia of G2 employees. What did the team look like? And like, what was your kind of discrete focus within the team? Like, what were you gold on? Like, how much were you writing?
Yeah.
Give me the whole landscape. Like, I'm very curious how it worked.
Yeah. Obviously it was my first like understanding of what a tech company looks like in general. So I didn't know any different when I started. But I don't know that I've ever heard of another company, even HubSpot. You said you went to HubSpot. Like, I don't know that HubSpot even did it the way that we were doing it, which is kind of crazy. But Jacob and Levi, Jacob was more on the content side. Levi was definitely leading more of our SEO efforts. We had 30 people-ish total. Somebody for email, specifically for content emails, because the amount of content, I think total, we were creating 150 articles a month.
Wild.
Insane. That's an insane number to begin with.
How do you manage that much?
You can't keep up because everybody was managing their own stuff. So we had 3 pods. I can't remember what they really were. One was like marketing. I was in the tech pod. So I was like writing about app development. Like that was until we exhausted like that cluster. Right. And then I think the next one I was writing about.
So this was based on topic themes, the pods? Okay, that makes sense, because then you build efficiencies through writing about it over and over.
Yeah. So within the pod, we had maybe 5 writers in each pod, each with different like specialties is a loose term. It's more like you just had a topic. Because like I said, I was writing about app development, which is hilarious. Like I had to learn how to like code basically to be able to write this thing. But it was a lot of just like really high level. I kept having to remind myself, we're writing articles. I'm not writing for software developers. I'm writing for people that are looking for tools to help them with software development. So it's more people like me than anything else. So if I don't, I'm trying to explain things in a way that I would understand it.
It's not like technical documentation.
Totally. Yeah. It's just like more fluffy top of funnel. We're just trying to get you to come to the article so we can push you to the category page for app development software. So each pod, there's 5 of us. Each pod had like 5 writers. Everybody wrote, I think the goals were like 8 to 10 articles a month. We would do all of our own keyword research. We would do all of our own outlines, like the whole kind of writing process 2 people in the pod were in charge of editing for everybody. 2 people in the pod were in charge of doing like SEO kind of checks for everybody. So me and my buddy Devin were on the SEO side. We had Mara and Rebecca doing so it was just like playing to people's strengths. Are you more analytical or are you a better writer? Mm-hmm. I was more analytical. Would go through both of those checks. We'd have a designer pop in, give us whatever we needed. At one point, it was somebody on our team that was designing. She's now still at G2 as a full-time brand designer there. So she moved from the content team over. But yeah, everybody was writing 8 to 10 articles. We would do our own outreach for them to get backlinks to them.
Everybody did their own outreach.
For a while, we did have like an outreach team. We had 3 people dedicated to that, but it was more for maintaining the things that were already ranking versus getting the new stuff off the ground. So we had to build like our own first couple backlinks or whatever. And if it popped off, then it would be passed over to that team to like, hey, this is really working. The thing about creating 150 articles a month is like, it takes a long time for stuff to rank sometimes. And the majority of our traffic would come from the top 30 articles, which I think is normal. But when you're creating content at that velocity and scale, it's kind of like heartbreaking when you're like the same 30 articles are still what's pushing traffic. And I rarely hit the 10 article a month. I'm not a fast writer, but mine would rank because I was deep in the SEO research of like what needed to be written there.
Quality over quantity, some say. So it's fascinating how decentralized that seems. Because at HubSpot, like we had plenty of writers, but there was also kind of a centralized, and this was more on my team, or under the org structure that I was on that team. But like we would do a centralized SEO roadmap of topics. Yeah. And that would incorporate ideas for product marketing and growth and freemium acquisition. And all these different teams would come together to create that once a quarter. And then like writers would have their lanes, like within marketing, within sales, within whatever topics, but they wouldn't have to do their own keyword research. And there was very lightweight briefs as well. It sounds like y'all had to do that all kind of on your own. Like you had topic areas, but it wasn't like, hey, write these 15 topics and then move on to the next topic.
Yeah. So that was like the first year. Jacob left. We did a little bit of a restructure. I broke off to lead like the on-page SEO team. So there was 3 of us. And we were really focused on content pruning, obviously when you're creating that much content, there's a lot of stuff that's like probably dragging you down too. So we had somebody dedicated to that for a while. And then also we were in charge of like the keyword maps at some point. The writers stopped making their own things and we would decide what they would be writing. But I think it's interesting, like experience based on a normal content team at a normal company. You have like, maybe you have one main product to write for and maybe 3 verticals that you're going after and you're trying to. So for gifting, it would be, okay, obviously all the gifting keywords, but then like employee engagement. What do we need to write around employee engagement? What do we need to write around customer loyalty? Those kinds of things. We didn't really have that at G2 because we weren't writing anything. The product marketing team was really writing the content for, here's how to use your reviews. Here's how to do, like, we weren't talking to our customers. We were solely on the acquisition side, which I think is great from an experience perspective, but I don't know that that really translates to another type of content job because I do have to think about how content affects revenue and how product marketing is positioned in every single piece of content versus at G2, it was hit this 5 million traffic number and that's all you have to worry about. So we were writing some things that I was like, we shouldn't be writing this.
Well, it's like you have every software category. So like the breadth is like there's no other company that has that.
Yeah, we can write about Snapchat because we have a social media category on G2, right?
Whereas for you now to write about those things would be ultimately an opportunity cost, if not diluting the topical authority.
It's a traffic grab.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. So what are you looking at in terms of like, I guess like there's always the false dichotomy, in my opinion, of content quality and scale, or content quantity and scale versus the quality.
Yeah.
So how have things changed now that maybe you're, running a smaller operation, things are more focused?
Yeah.
How has scope changed with your role?
I've always been the quality over quantity side. I just fully believe in the long-term plays over the short-term wins. Especially as a small team, you don't want to just keep spinning your wheels to have these like short-term wins. You're doing the same work every month, every year, whatever. But the long-term stuff compounds on itself. So that's when I think about quality of like, okay, in the first page of Google, like how are we going to get our article there and how are we going to keep it there? So building in even that, like, how do we maintain this spot? How do we there's something to be said about, you do a sprint for content creation and then maybe the next quarter you're doing half the amount of creation, but you're trying to maintain all of those other things. So I think it's a balance that I've never had to do before. At G2, we didn't have to do that because it was just create as much as you can. I also think that I am in this growth role tied to numbers. So I really think about, is this post, this, 2,000 word article worth the time it takes to get this number or not? So it makes me kind of second guess some of the things that I've just put together. But I want to be really sure that it's going to be worth writing. So back to that, what I was saying at Postal was yes, this piece can be used for SEO, but also could sales send this to somebody that they're trying to prospect with in terms of us being a thought leader in this space? I think there is a way to do both. Some pieces there's not. Some pieces you just have to have this for SEO. But I really try to make that cost benefit of having a balance of both of those things so that one piece of content actually is 3 pieces of content. And then how do I break that off into social and all of those other things? So yeah, I think a lot of companies right now are saying things like less, do more with less. And I don't know that they actually understand what that actually means. I think everybody's just it's really buzzwordy right now, but my boss, and maybe a cliche, but work smarter, not harder is and they'll say they're just because I'm lazy. I would just rather do less work. I'm okay, I can get with that.
Yeah, I feel like that's always been my MO. People nowadays seem to use that as a proxy for, repurpose everything in this really shitty way. And yeah. It's just
if it didn't work the first time, repurposing it the second time is probably not going to work either.
Yeah, exactly. But it's funny, when you enter a role like this, I was talking to a friend the other day about when they had become, an executive, they thought about everything differently. And this disconnect between the CEO doesn't understand marketing. And then it's you enter a position where you're in that, so to speak, CEO position. And now all of a sudden you're oh, I understand what they didn't understand. Yep. And I don't know, this is probably an older idea, but in content, it used to be just brainstorm a bunch of topic ideas, write about everything. Your customer's going to love it. Build a media company, do this, that, this. And then you enter this role where you see the inherent constraints, obviously, with your budget, your resources, and all of that stuff. But you see also expected value. It's if we do this, we can't do this other thing. That's an opportunity cost. And the same thing happened in experimentation. There was always this idea oh, we don't know what to do. Test everything. And it's you enter a role where you're the person running all of that. And you're we can't test everything. So we have to be judicious about what we assign value to. Yeah.
And I think that one of the biggest benefits to being at again, and I will say I very specifically went to a company that was had a freemium model because I was just interested in how I could use my knowledge of the other things. How I just feel there are things that I've wanted to do at Postal that I wasn't able to go after to drive those conversions because it was that doesn't make sense for search intent. We have to skip those things. But I think that it just opens up a whole different side of search. It's a little bit more e-commerce. It's just something new for me to learn that I've never really had to understand. But I think it's an interesting challenge, so inside of our analytics, we even have it all the way tied down into transactions, an e-commerce company, e-commerce tracking, because inside the website is the product. So I can literally see like these 3 channels are driving the most revenue. There's one of me. That's where I'm going to focus my time. Obviously, yeah, like I said earlier, like there's a lot of this. I hated to even use the word dark funnel, but like here we are. I will never say dark social. It's just
Please.
like, that's just word of mouth. I'm sorry.
Thank
like
you.
that's
Thank
not
you.
real. That's brand awareness.
We got a hot take.
I knew there would be at least one. But I think that there is a lot of dark funnel that we don't know is driving, but like the dollars and cents inside of our analytics is saying these 3 channels, it's search, it's direct, which that's that brand awareness. Like, okay, we know we need some of that still because people are coming directly to Loop and Tie, whether that's our customers, whatever, it doesn't really matter. We have a huge growth loop, etc. But it makes it easy for me to make those judicious decisions around just like, I can or can't do that because it's not driving dollars.
Yeah. Let's hammer on that just real quick. And then I want to start talking about hot takes in the podcast. But I saw this tweet from John Henry the other day, who is just always on point. Like he's always talking shit, but I love it. It's like very honest and to the point. He talked about this idea, like if you've never, can't remember how he phrased it, but something about like if you've never had to, if you don't have metrics and like you're like, oh, we don't care about like attribution, then you probably never had a boss or never had to hold a number. So it's like now that you're in this growth position, you're like, oh, yes, there's benefits to doing this stuff that we can't track.
Yep.
But we still got to track shit.
Yep.
Like we still have to show that our efforts are actually worth something.
Yeah, it's funny here. So when I started here, I also was like, I want brand in the title too. Like, and MK explained like brand sits with everybody. It's not just one person's job. It's everybody's job. And I think that was really important. And it hit home for me because at Postal, like I felt like I was the only one. Like, we have to do this. Everybody has to like this LinkedIn post. Everybody has like, it shouldn't be like that. It should be a full effort from everyone. But I think having 3 marketers that are really brand centric in different lanes. We have a product marketer that's really brand centric. Our CMO is very brand centric. So like understanding that there's a through line between all of that. But and I brought it up because MK likes to say, I just want to make cool shit. I'm like, that works. We have to make cool shit that works.
Yes.
Like I hear you. I'm here to do cool shit too. On top of the SEO stuff, we're doing a lot of like content, like video series planning and like YouTube stuff and just kind of like trying to have more of an e-commerce like community play to go along with the product-led growth side. So we're hoping that PLG and CLG will come together nicely for us. But all of that still leans back to search for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So podcast, you started the podcast. Are you still doing the podcast?
We are not. We did it for 2 seasons and Sarah and I made the decision to stop doing it, honestly, because I was somebody's boss and I was like, I never want these things to be misconstrued as something that I'm talking about somebody, because most of the time it was past experiences or Sarah's experience or it was never, honestly, it was really never targeted at anybody, but some of the things could have been kind of conveyed that way or like seen that way, which was not our intention at all. I think it's tough when you move up and you're Sarah too. You're like basically have a shit posting content like podcast. And I was like,
y'all spoke very honestly. It was very authentic.
Yeah. And I think that it was a whole shtick for a while. Like it was very refreshing. It was a time that, we were going through COVID and it was just like Sarah and I had never met each other and we started this podcast across the country from each other. But it was a way to say a lot of things out loud that everybody was thinking that nobody wanted to say. Yeah. And I think we're both just loud and we'll say it. And it was great for a really long time. I just think that we kind of were running out of things to say, or we found ourselves saying the same things over and over again, or like every episode at the end of every hot take, we were like, it just always ends up, if you're not happy, quit your job. Like we can't, like we have to have something new to say. But yeah, I think when the end of the last season, I kind of approached Sarah and was just like, hey, like, to be honest, like not doing so well. My work environment's not great. This was like a cherry on top that I was really excited to do for a long time, but now it's like the 8th thing on my list and I possibly can't. So we made the decision. It was tough. The website still lives. All the content still lives. It will be helpful for anybody coming into tech. Hopefully some laughs for some people, but it was really good for us for a long time. I think too, that's when I was looking for content jobs and every single person was like, do you have podcast experience? Like every content job, they just expect you to be able to like spin up a podcast. And I'm like, first of all, not every company needs a podcast, but then I just started my own podcast. So I was like, sure, I have podcast experience. I did it myself.
So I think the concept is really cool. And I was talking to Devin Bramhall, and I think she actually mentioned this on a podcast episode we did with her. That my co-founder David did, but about how marketers are like too friendly, like with each other. And like we don't often say like what the truth is. And I know from my experience, like being in experimentation and analytics, like everyone's kind of like a pedantic nerd in those spaces. So like if something's wrong on a LinkedIn post, they're not going to be rude about it. They're not trying to call you out and embarrass you, but they'll be like, hey, like actually this is inaccurate. Here's the thing. But in marketing, a lot of the times I almost feel like there's like this stage performance where we're all having a conversation and nobody means anything they say. And it's all just to perform this like veneer of politeness. And like oftentimes we have these words where I don't know what they mean. Like dark social is something that like, I feel like it's been around forever. Now it's taken on this new concept and this new thing. And it's like this movement. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? And you just said, oh, it's word of mouth.
It is, but it is though. I think that and I may be a purist too, right? Where I'm like, we've overcomplicated the shit out of all of this stuff. We've overcomplicated marketing to sell MarTech software. Like
100%. Yes.
And I think Sarah said that once on something, but that is like just a light bulb for me because it's like, we created this whole industry of B2B MarTech that just like props itself up. And it's great and it's really small and it's really easy to make a huge impact in there. And like, that's where you see all these influencer spaces. Like I am the first one to say like, I'm not an influencer. Like every post that I have on LinkedIn is like kind of a hot take. And then I just delete it. Like I just like close the window. I just had to get it out of my
post. I
love Twitter. Yeah, I should use that. I love Twitter for that reason, because it felt like a safer space for that. But then Twitter went to shit. So I'm like, okay, I guess LinkedIn gets these takes now. But again, I think it's important for people to actually say things that matter and mean something. And like, I think there are a lot of people making consultancy careers and all of these things. And like, I'm happy for them to have that personal brand, for them to be able to get out of these companies and able to like sustain on their own. But like, how much of that is like smoke and mirrors and dog and pony show? I think a lot of it, but it works for some people. So who am I to fault them? They figured out a way to make money by sharing their words. I don't know.
Yeah. I want to, if you're cool with this, I want to go through some of your hot takes, because this is related to one of yours that I thought was the best one. I really resonated with it, but just to maybe preheat the oven. One area that I found interesting is like the whole, X-led growth thing, which like, I feel like some of these terms do originate as like something helpful and then turn into something that almost becomes a caricature of what it once was.
Yep.
It's like you had product-led growth and then you're like, oh, sales, that's in opposition to like sales-led growth or marketing-led growth or whatever. It's like Dropbox was the original example.
Yep.
And then you're like, okay, but we got to have product-led sales too. It's like, okay, we're blending models here. Interesting. And then I just saw it come full circle. I saw this poster on like product-led marketing. And then eventually I'm like, when do we just sit down and just ignore all these terms and just grow our businesses in whatever way is the most feasible for us to grow our business without calling it something?
I think that's like the biggest. I think LinkedIn is a great place for people to connect and learn together. And it's a huge community builder. But I also think it can be a huge time suck and like rabbit holes of these things that it's just like, and then people will take that for face value. And then like, we need to implement this at our company, but you have no idea if what they're doing is actually working. Like, I think the same way, it's very similar to like when you do a competitive analysis, like you can see some of what's working, but like, just because this company launched that ebook doesn't mean 1 week later we need to change our entire everybody on the marketing team needs to write this ebook. Who knows if it actually is working for them? Like, comes a time and a place when we can't look to other like sources to solve our problems. Like we have to look inside our company, find our unique problems, and then plug those holes or figure out how. You have to start focusing on yourself at some point. And I think that a lot of companies, and like, unfortunately, like the perfect example is like a CMO that thinks they understand SEO and they're telling you to do all of these things. And I'm like, but that's not going to work. And it's because I have all this experience, and it's because I've tried those things, and because you read something on LinkedIn one time doesn't mean that we need to change our whole strategy to do that. Like we can try it, but I'm telling you, you're holding me to these numbers and that's not going to get me there. So you're going to trust me to do my job, or are you going to trust this random thing on LinkedIn that you saw about a company that you have no idea if their problems are the same as ours?
It's so funny how those trends pop up. It's like for a while, everybody was trying to create a category. And then it's like, what if we just capture demand? What if we just do the old unsexy thing?
And I think it's always a pendulum, right? Or maybe a circle of just like, we're so far this way, and then we go back to doing it this way, but then that way gets boring because everybody's doing that. So then you try to go back over here. It's just like, just focus on yourself and try to make a somewhat straight line to go forward. Like It doesn't need to be a circle. But I think the other thing is like most of these startups are trying to do it in 3 years or less, which is just like insane. I don't know where that like, maybe it's the VCs and the cycles. And again, why I'm happy to be Lupin Tie is bootstrapped. So like, I don't have any of that like breathing down my neck about like 3x your goals. I'm like, how? With who?
Well, the era of sustainability is back and profitability. So it's a good time to be at a bootstrapped company.
For sure.
Do you want to do a mini segment on the podcast hot takes? I'd love to talk about the hot take and give some additional commentary. If you have any updated beliefs, any additional color to add.
I'm sure I have updated beliefs. I'm a strong proponent of changing your mind. So
nice. So this one is related to what we just talked about. And this was the one that resonated with me. I think it was one of the most recent episodes too. It was, you basically said, hot take, we don't have a hot take. Like sometimes we're just heads down working. I see stuff and I'm like, I don't even have an opinion on this. I don't even like, why would I even have an opinion on this? I don't care. Like I'm just working on my thing. I love that.
Yeah. I think that in this era of just like, we consume content all the time. I saw this meme where it was like, I go from my medium-sized screen for 8 hours a day to then my big screen, but I'm still on my little screen, like taking a break from the big screen. And it's like, we're just constantly consuming content. And I think it forces you to feel like you have to do something or like have an opinion about every single thing you consume. I can't do that. Like, I just don't, sometimes I'm just like there to consume, to turn my brain off. And like, I go outside and I touch grass or something like.
I love that. Yeah. I think y'all said touch grass too is the advice, which I love.
Yeah. I just like, we're so tied to our screens now and consuming content that like it forces us to have opinions, to multitask all the time. And like, it's really easy to like find yourself in like a depression hole with that because you're like, I'm behind, I'm not keeping up. But like, who are you trying to keep up with? The influencer on LinkedIn that posts once a day and he's making money on just that. And that's his whole job. Like that can't be the bar. It's not possible for everybody to do that. And I think it's similarly, like, just focus on yourself. What do you actually want to do? But I think that through the consuming and all of that, like we look to other sources to tell us what we actually want, which is the mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a couple thoughts on that. How do I frame this? So one is I've stopped consuming almost everything. I do still go on LinkedIn sometimes. Well, so this is maybe going to get me in trouble because I know that there's a large segment of people who say like, oh, you've got to stay informed. Like it's important as a citizen, but I don't really like do any news anymore. And this is so extreme. So just forgive me here, but like I was in New York, moving to New York, and I was at dinner, and it was when Donald Trump was getting what is the word? Arraigned? Like he flew to New York to basically like get indicted.
Yeah.
And like people were talking about it. I was like, wait, what's happening? And they're like, seriously? You don't know? And I was like, I have no idea what's going on in the world. Like, and I obviously that's an extreme and I still look at the news sometimes, but like, that's what, because I just realized like, okay, so there's the work part. And then there's the life part. And if I am to stay on top of everything else, like I'm not going to have time for my relationships, my family, like
that's
all
important.
of the things that I want to be spending time doing. And then on the work side, it's like, I could stay up to date with every little like auto GPT, like every AI thing that's coming out. And I should, with some of that stuff, like it's going to be important for my job. But also like the most effective thing I can do is often just like setting up a coffee or a dinner with a prospect and like getting face to face. Like it's like the things that I know work are actually really simple. And it's like getting lost in that noise prevents me from doing the effective things with my job too.
Yeah. I think it's so tough because we're in such an industry where like so much of it is noise and it's like people are making money on the noise. So it's like, well, this is working for somebody. But you're right. I think most oftentimes, like, especially in marketing, it's simple. Know your ICP, ask them questions. Like the best content comes from those sales calls. Like it's not from Google even. Like it's actually sitting down with people and being like, what do you need from us? Like, what would you like to see from us? Which is the step that most companies skip and most people do. Like when you get on a Zoom call, you're immediately talking about whatever's on the call. I'm like, hey, how's your day going? Like, is the sun out there? Like, because I think working at home, especially too, you're just tied to your computer so much more than even when I was in an office. Like I don't have any interaction with other people, or like it makes it more important to get that in my real life and touch grass, to say that again. But.
So that was the next take around like working in the office versus working remote. And I know you started the pod and did it during the pandemic, which is a weird time. Mm-hmm. I used to work fully remote. I still work fully remote. Before I loved it. Now I'm like pretty ambivalent on it. Now I really enjoy going to coffee shops and co-working spaces.
Yep.
But your take was we don't work 8 hours a day. And I thought that was interesting because you made a couple points there. One was like just the constant expansion of work in the all remote world. And like the idea that you should set up guardrails on your day so you can actually truncate the time that you're working, because you're really not that whole day.
Right.
It kind of bleeds into the rest of your life and it creates this very stressful existence where you're never fully on and you're never fully off.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the perfect way to put it is I've definitely lost that. Like when you go to the office, you sit down, you do your work, maybe because you want to, maybe because other people are watching you and they're like, is Bridget fucking around? Maybe it's like, you know what I mean? There's just some like inherent sense of like other people around me, we're all working toward this thing. But then you get back on the train and you leave it there. Like I can't remember ever thinking about it after I left the building. And now that my desk is built into my kitchen, it's just like, all bleeds. And I think there's definitely benefits to both. I miss being in person and like interacting with people on like a normal basis. Having a meeting in person, like something that simple is crazy to me. Like, I don't know what I would do with my hands if I had to meet somebody in person now. But the other side of that is like the flexibility of, today I'm going to start at 9:30. And could I show up to the office at 9:30 instead of 9? Sure, of course. But I find myself too, when I'm like zoning out, I'm still sitting at the desk instead of like, oh, I'm going to get up and go to the kitchen for a walk, or I'm going to go sit in a different area of the office or any of those things. So similar to you, like if I have to be heads down on something, like, and I really want to be focused on it, I try to go to a coffee shop if I'm going to write or something like that. I find myself trying to multitask almost always when I'm at home, even on meetings. I like a Zoom meeting. It's so much easier to just like look at my LinkedIn than if I was sitting in a room with somebody and we're having a conversation. And I don't do it on purpose. It's just like, it's the nature of it. I don't know. It definitely takes a more concerted effort to focus on things when you're sitting at home.
Yeah, I definitely think if it's unconstrained, if you haven't thought consciously about how you're doing it, it's got a bunch of twisted downsides for mental health, especially, but also productivity, because there is this paradoxical effect. It's almost like a rubber band effect. When you do truly take a break, a mental rest, you come back with greater vigor, greater ideation. Your decision quality is clearer. So it's like this paradoxical thing of like working less, but working more effectively.
It's finding a balance. Eddie Schlaner talks about it a lot in his copywriting stuff. It's like, in order to be creative, you have to stop trying at some point. Like the best ideas come to you at night. They come to you in the shower. They come to you while you're at the gym. Like that's real. Your subconscious brain needs to be not thinking about it. And I think we just try to force a lot of things. I think too, different companies have different ways of thinking about remote work. And I don't know that any of them are wrong, but I think that they need to make sure that everybody in their workforce is in on how they think about remote work. Postal was in California. There were days when obviously I was online 3 hours, 2 hours before everybody else, but I was still getting Slacks at 8 p.m. And I'm like, I am not staying on for that. It can wait till tomorrow. And everything kind of becomes this fire. And it's like, what are we doing? Like, why is this happening? Which I just don't think is healthy for, like, just because I'm at home doesn't mean I'm available all the time, right? Like you don't have me for 12 hours a day. And I think too, the balance of like, some days it's 6 hours, some days it's 8 hours, some days you just don't have it. I think that is better from work from home than it is at the office. When you're sitting at the office and I remember I'm having days when I sat at the office, I'm like, I can't do anything today. My brain doesn't work. And you're sitting there.
Yeah.
Whereas if I have that now, I'm closing my computer, I'm going out for a walk, maybe an hour, and then I come back and I'm like, okay, I can think about it again, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I gotta remind myself quickly that I am recording a podcast, and sometimes I can't like get myself in too much trouble. But like the glory days of remote work for me were when I was at HubSpot, and like, let me just couch this and like try to say it.
Yeah, you might have to cut out that postal part.
So at HubSpot, like it was fully in office except for like, I don't know, 20 or 30 people. And I was one of those remote employees, and my manager was too. And this was like earlier in my life. I was very much nomadic. I would travel like 7 months out of the year. And I was really good at kind of establishing boundaries. I didn't even set boundaries. I just like trained people to not expect responses right away.
That's more than half the battle, I think, is like, I'm not available at this time.
Yeah. But so to do that, you have to do good work and actually like produce output. And that's what my sole focus was just like, I'm going to produce shit. I'm going to be a producer.
Yep.
So people didn't really have this problem. Like they didn't really like expect me to be always on or like in meetings and stuff like that. And they were all in office. So they were doing their meetings in person. So they forgot about the remote employees, which was awesome. But yeah, I remember I would travel, I'd be like in Rome or something like that. And I'd want to, go see this museum. So I would have a couple of hours in the morning when everybody was like offline because I'm time zones ahead. Mm-hmm. I would get fucking everything done in like 3 or 4 hours. And then I would just go, just gallivant around Rome for the rest of the
balance.
day.
That's the balance I'm trying to find now, to be honest. Like Loop and Tie is fully remote. Postal was not. It was fully remote for people that didn't live in the area, but there was maybe half the company that lived there. So I think it was two very different cultures for people that were in the office and people that were remote. And I think the expectations were totally different too. But yeah, I think being able to have that balance, and you're right. Like if you can get your work done in 3 or 4 hours a day, why are you sitting at your computer for 8? Right. Like if you can set yourself, and I think that just comes down to like, how far in advance can you plan? For me, it's like, okay, I'm going to do this whole quarter. These are the things, even down to tasks of like, these are the things that I need to get done this week. At a startup this small, there's a lot of things that just kind of come at you during the week. But it's still like, I could, in theory, get the majority of my work done Monday through Wednesday. Like just start building that for yourself. And then, like you said, like set expectations about what they can expect from you. They can expect great work, and they can expect me to not respond on Slack within 5 minutes.
Yeah. And so this stuff too, it's interesting because like it shouldn't. So like there is a way where like you can carve out a good work-life balance. But like in my early 20s, I was incredibly ambitious and I wanted to like learn and move as fast as I could. Mm-hmm. But this also applies to that. So like you get your tasks done, the things that you're expected to do, the production. And if you still want to work, so to speak, right, it can be on different things. Like I could spend more time reading books and taking courses, thinking, ideating, like brainstorming, like all of those cool things that you don't have time to do if your work just kind of like endlessly bleeds out. So I think it's important, whatever your goals are, to have that that structure, I guess.
Yeah. I think too, in this time, I've learned like, similar to you in my early 20s, I was very ambitious and somebody was giving me a task list and I finished it. Right. Like that was great. I loved school because it was structured. It was like, read the book, you'll get an A on the test. It was easily understood how to succeed. Even when you're given a task list, like, yes, the metrics are still on you, but it's also still on your boss that they give you the right things to work on. When you become the boss or you keep moving up, like that becomes a lot grayer. It's a lot harder to understand and build the structure for yourself. So you're right. It becomes a lot more like on you to not have that gray area. And it's really easy to just be lazy and not build all of those things out. But if you want the balance of both, you have to have structure and you have to give yourself a break.
Is it really hard to define what work is actually work, especially like running a company now? Because it never feels like work to me to go get cocktails with like clients or prospects, but it is. It's like one of the most valuable things I can do, and it feels like I'm just like fucking around, or like if I'm like reading a book or something like that, like it's pretty important that I like sit down and actually like read and like get myself up to speed on the stuff. But it always feels like, I should be like answering emails or doing something very like fixated, focused. So it is like a little bit of a mindset psychological shift.
Yeah, it's an interest. And I don't know how much of this, I talked to Sarah about this a lot, like how much of it is the pandemic and all these things and work changing, and how much is it us just moving up and understanding that this is how it works at these levels now instead. I think the combination of both is tough.
Yeah. You keep transitioning me really well to the next take.
Love that.
Act more senior than you are. So I'll just add a little color there to the piece that I really enjoyed. A couple points you made were stop asking feedback for feedback on everything you do. Say your ideas. If you have ideas and interesting points, like say them. So I will say I've always been pretty cool with those things. I love feedback, but as an employee, like earlier in my career, like I wanted it. But now as a leader, like when people can make autonomous decisions or at least come to the table with like a complete piece of work or an idea without like feedback every step of the way.
Isn't that great?
Oh my God, it's the best.
Yeah. I think honestly, like obviously when you start a new job, you don't have all the context, right? Like I still ask my boss, MK, like, is this good? But it's always to get to the point for feedback so that I don't make the same mistake the next time. So they don't you know what I mean? So like you're learning through that feedback cycle. Mm-hmm. So I think that feedback is important to a point, but I think that we overestimate sometimes, like not how much your boss cares. That's the wrong way to say it. But like sometimes getting it to 80% is more important than it's sitting in their inbox for 10 days. They would have rather you just like shipped it at 80% and learned something in the process, because they have their own things to worry about. Like, especially at these startups, I think at the ad agency that I was at, the work was definitely disseminated. Like there was 2 of us on the content team and then there was a head of content, and he didn't have outside work outside of client facing part and like the work that we were doing and like approving our work and like having that feedback cycle. That's how ad agencies work. But at a startup, my boss has a separate job. Technically, the things that I'm doing are falling under them, but they have a completely separate thing. They hired a director of growth to be able to run the growth side without them. Mm-hmm. And just having that understanding, and like, that's how you move up at companies is, can you autonomously figure it out? Like, that's how we end up in these roles.
Yeah. A good rule of thumb for me is like, am I asking for feedback? Do I want feedback or do I want validation and permission and acceptance?
Yep.
And I think oftentimes we ask for feedback and we just want somebody to say, yeah, it's cool. Like,
yeah, it's great.
You're good to go.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I had good mentors or like leaders earlier in my career at like my first company, Lawn Starter. I remember they told me like, if the decision is under $5,000, just make it.
Yep.
And at CXL, Pep was like, you choose. Like,
yeah.
You don't have to come to me for everything.
Yeah.
So I had really good leaders early on who kind of understood that and enabled that.
Yeah. My boss said something to me last week, 2 weeks ago, just like, we hired you because you're smarter at this than us. And I said, okay, great. Yeah. I'll get working then. I think though it can be hard. Like I'm moving from more of a strategy role into strategy plus execution, and like getting started is hard, like to begin with, especially when you feel like you don't have a lot of the context. But more than half the battle is just starting and being like, okay, where is this going to take me next? And then the next step. I think
it gives people something to give you feedback on.
Right. Well. Yeah, no, for sure. I think feedback is important. But I think if like you said, if you feel like you got it and you don't need the acceptance, you're like, okay, I got it. Like also in my role, at least, like for the social post today, I just pulled something that already existed and just kind of rewrote it. And I was like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Like you actually shouldn't.
And what's like the level of risk if you make a mistake? I think that's a big one too. If it's a huge strategic decision, I'm going to go to my co-founders and be like, hey, can you review like this?
Yeah,
really
we better have
email.
at least one meeting about that, right?
Yeah.
Like there better
but if it's
be
a tweet, if it's an email, like I don't really, whatever, like make the mistake. It's fine.
Yep. Yeah. They always joke that the intern wrote the tweet and why didn't somebody look at that? But like chances are nobody's reading the intern's tweets. So
yeah, I love that one. You have to suss out a company's culture. So this is more like how, because I don't know. I think it's hard to, especially a bigger company. Like there's so many like different teams and layers, and like this person sucks, but the team's cool. And like
I think there are a lot of layers to this, like you just said. I think talk to as many people as you can in an interview cycle. Like if for head of growth, like I talked to product, I talked to sales, I talked to the CEO, I talked to like everybody across the team because I knew my role was going to be cross-functional. And I even like asked some of the same questions. Obviously, I have different conversations with each person, but I want to make sure that those teams are aligned with each other. That says a lot. Like,
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, do you have the same answers to what your biggest company goal is or not? And I think that a lot of it has to do with interview experience, candidate experience. Like, did they respond to your thank you notes, or how was your interview? Was it really formal? Was it informal? Were you able to ask the questions that you wanted to? But I think too, this goes even further into like you should be interviewing the company back. And if you don't feel like that, then maybe it's not a company that you want to work for. That's how I feel for me personally. Like I want it to be a very mutual relationship between me and the company that I work for. I don't want it to be one-sided. So sometimes it works for people to be one-sided, and that's cool. I think that goes back to just understanding what you need out of a company instead of, that's what I mean, I guess, by sussing it out is really figuring out what you want. And does that company have those things? And are you willing to ask those questions?
Yeah, being willing to ask the questions is an important one. I've definitely come into interviews and like I have sussed out company cultures this way by asking really tough questions about public criticisms.
How do they respond? How do they respond to those questions?
Yeah, and if they're like transparent and like address it face on, if they give me a PR answer, I'm like, I don't know. But that's important, and it's hard. Like it's uncomfortable to do that.
Yeah, one of the other things that Sarah talked about was ask them about their trajectory, ask them about the tough markets right now, ask them about their layoffs. How was it handled? Like maybe not the CEO. I would never ask the CEO that question. I would probably ask somebody that's team was impacted. Be like, did you feel like the company handled that well or not? And why? That's a tough question.
Interesting stories there.
Yeah, that's a tough question to ask in an interview. But like, to be honest, like you just said, I'm less. Do I want to know that nobody handles layoffs well? I'll just put that out there. But did the person answer honestly, or did they try to just skirt around it? I want to work with people that, even if the answers aren't the best ones, like be realistic. I think that's half of it about a culture that I want is just, there's so much of the SaaS space that is so rocket ship. It's just like, we're all just making all this shit up, but it's like, can you be real? Because we actually have to function inside of a real space.
Yeah, we call that success theater. It's when everything's rosy all the time, and it's like, it's all good, but it's not.
It's performative.
Like, let's speak honestly. Like, let's have some intellectual honesty.
Doesn't help the people that work for your company if you say everything's going great, and then the next day they're laying off 40 people. Like that's how you ruin trust in your company. Yeah.
All right, we're at time. Is there anything I didn't bring up that you want to talk about?
I don't think so, but it's been a great conversation.
Yeah, this was fun. I'm glad we got to do the hot takes. I love the podcast. So if you ever want to re-up that, I'd be a listener. So
I love, yeah, I'll chat with Sarah about it. I think she's doing some things on the side, which is great. Yeah, I think the best part about, the side hustle thing was a huge deal for that part of time. I think it's also nice to know like when to stop,
Yeah. Well, otherwise, just keep speaking honestly and
yeah, you can
hot takes when you get the chance.
Yeah, my hot takes on LinkedIn, they're always there.
Nice. Well, where can people find you online?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter when it decides to work. I maybe tweet now like once every 2 weeks, but it's both LinkedIn and Twitter. Honestly, though, I don't really talk about like marketing or work stuff. I'm just like a human behind this little profile picture. So, yeah.
That's the way to do it. All right. We'll put the links in the show description, but thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Alex.